This is exactly the reason why I didn't want to play World of Warcraft, because I've been stuck playing it and haven't been making videos. I decided to leave my druid for a mage that I just started, so. Anyways, have you ever wondered what would happen to Godzilla if he lost his dorsal plates? From what it looks like, especially in the newer movies, it seems as though he needs them to help him generate his atomic breath when he's charging up. I always thought it was like a show piece or something, but in the latest MonsterVerse movie, 2019, was the first time in the MonsterVerse movies that we see him using it as an intimidation display, or at least that's the time it was documented. Before then, or in the 2014 movie leading up to that movie, it just looked like he was just looking really cool, and it's his way of telling everyone else, look, I'm about to burst your butt wide open. But what would happen if he didn't have them? Does he absolutely need them? Can he still shoot out atomic breath without them? Well, one thing is for sure, we know that Godzilla can absolutely regenerate his dorsal plates. He'd lost them before. Remember in the graphic novel Godzilla Aftershock, the prequel story to Godzilla King of the Monsters? Muto Prime, the monster he was fighting, administered a sonic roar that ended up shattering his dorsal plates and knocking him right over. When the Muto Prime was distracted, Godzilla was able to lift it onto his back and fire a powerful pulse of atomic energy from the broken dorsal plates. When charging up for his atomic blast, it looks like some of the energy is circulating through the dorsal plates. And from what we know about Godzilla, based on some of the skeletal structures that we've seen, the dorsal plates are part of his skeletal structure, at least in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. We can see evidence of this, that it looks to be fused as part of the skeleton. It would depend if his dorsal plates operate in the same way that the sail of the Spinosaurus aegypticus dinosaur from Jurassic Park spines operate. But if that were the case, if he were to fall on them or something, directly attached to his spinal column would cause a lot of damage. And yes, Godzilla can regenerate quite quickly, but it kind of seems counterproductive to have them so closely attached to a very important part of his body. It doesn't make sense for them to be literally fused to his spine, because if they were, basically if he fell on them or damaged them, that would damage his spine as well, so that doesn't make any sense. Scientifically and biologically, it makes more sense for them to be separate from his spinal column, similar to the Stegosaurus, which was another dinosaur that helped inspire the design for Godzilla. Now, I feel like we have to break this video up into two, because we're going to do a video as to what his dorsal plates are primarily for, at least in theory. But we're going to mention some of that in our explanation as to what would happen if he didn't have them. If Godzilla's plates are used for sexual dimorphism, much like a showpiece to attract females or to intimidate other males, then it's something that he would be able to shed or he could do without. I would imagine that male Godzillas would fight amongst themselves, and if the plates are literally fused to the spine and there is damage, that would render the creature completely unstable, and it would honestly be a poor evolution design. Seeing that kaiju in the MonsterVerse are creatures that evolved to be the best versions of themselves, I don't think that this is the case with Godzilla's spines, that they are fused to his dorsal column or to his spinal column. Since they mentioned in the MonsterVerse that his spines and him lighting them up is used as an intimidation display, that could be used for enemies, but it makes us believe that this was also something that he used to sexually attract females of his species. Now, what if he didn't have them? Well, he wouldn't be sexually attractive. He would probably still survive without them, and honestly, he'd probably be able to grow them back. Even if they were attached to his spinal column, it would probably just take a lot more time to regenerate if he basically broke his back with these things being damaged. But that's probably not the case. He wouldn't be able to communicate as effectively as Godzillas probably do using their dorsal plates, because it is a method of communication, the way that elephants use their ears and low rumbling noises. They use an array of different expressions and movements on their bodies to communicate. The dorsal plates being able to light up was just one of them. Now, a more dangerous affair for Godzilla is if the plates were primarily used as a temperature regulation system, the way that Stegosaurus's plates were. Since Godzilla seems to be somewhat, in part, inspired by Stegosaurus' design, we have to look at what the plates on Stegosaurus were used for. It is believed that the Stegosaurus' plates were used to regulate their temperature. If the Stegosaurus is believed to be a cold-blooded organism, it would make sense for it to utilize its plates to soak up sunlight during the day, and to disperse body heat as well. The reason why this is a popular theory is because of the 1986 study that concluded that the outer layers of Stegosaurus' plates were thickly lined with blood vessels. Consider that Godzilla is a walking nuclear reactor. Now, we as humans have made nuclear reactors, and they are said to be the heart of a nuclear power plant. They contain and control nuclear chain reactions that produce heat through a physical process called fission, which is the same thing that happens in Godzilla's body. And that heat is what we use to make steam that spins a turbine to create electricity. So, not only are we putting all that heat to good waste or to good use, but we also have measurements in place to cool the nuclear reactor, because of course, if it gets too hot, then catastrophe happens. Now, the process that they use to cool a nuclear reactor is they push water past the nuclear core and carry the heat off to somewhere else. The chain reaction that actually runs the reactor can be shut off in a matter of seconds, and what's left in the core, the radioactive material, will continue to give off heat for a long time. If you don't cool a nuclear power plant or a reactor, the uranium would overheat and melt. If that happens, what's called a nuclear meltdown occurs, and then people get cancer and die. Okay, that's just a very simplified version of it, but there can be fires, explosions, and yes, people can get radiation sickness, which causes cancer, and they can die. Chernobyl, that's exactly what happened. So imagine Godzilla if he didn't have this method. Godzilla might use his plates in a way to regulate his temperature. When we see him charging up, that's probably him giving off that excess heat, or it might be him cooling down his body. When we saw him in Godzilla King of the Monsters right after Serizawa souped him up with that bomb blast, we saw him go above the water and stand on nothing but air, it seems, because, it was very deep and he just happened to be floating in the water. But anyways, I digress. And he released his atomic breath. And we thought that it was cool and yeah. What if he was doing that to release the excess heat that built up as a result of him getting the sudden surge of energy? Just like with a nuclear power plant, if Godzilla were to get too hot too fast or not be able to regulate his heat, he would have to have a way to dispel all that heat. And possibly he uses it in his atomic breath. And that's possibly also why it seems as though his atomic breath is used as a last resort. Have you ever wondered why Godzilla doesn't go straight to just using his atomic breath? Could it be that he has to get enraged enough, or he has to be expending enough energy to make himself hot enough so that he would produce enough heat to produce all the energy that goes into an atomic breath? Think about it. When you're angry, you get hotter. When you're fighting or you're running and you're exercising and you're working out, you need a way to expel that heat. The way that humans regulate our temperature is that we sweat. But look at our core temperature. Our core body temperature is said to be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. When we're working out, our body gets much hotter. But if we work out or expend energy too much too fast, we can get something called heat exhaustion, which is something that happens when your body can't get rid of the extra heat that's made during a stressful exercise or whatever it is you're doing that causes you to overheat. Your body temperature rises more than is healthy. See, our body already functions at that one temperature, but if our environment is even hotter than that for too long and we're not able to sustain or we are overheating, we actually could die. Just like any other animal, we need a way to expel the heat. Your computers, that's why they have cooling systems. Whales and other animals in the ocean have a blubber or some kind of system around their bodies to keep them warm. They keep them very warm, but they don't have to worry about that because they are constantly in a medium that is always cooling them. Now, here's the kicker. Godzilla doesn't really have to worry about this as much either because he's usually, or spends most of his time, in the water where it's extremely cold, especially very deep. The deeper you get into the ocean is the colder it gets. But when he's on land and he's fighting other creatures, he'll get hot a lot quicker because he's expending more energy. He's out of the water, having to lug around his weight like that. That will cause this walking nuclear reactor to overheat. And guess what happens when all of that heat builds up and there's nowhere for it to go fast enough? Boom, his atomic breath. And that's why he uses it as a last resort. Now, back to what we were saying. It is possible that if Godzilla didn't have his dorsal plates, that he wouldn't be able to effectively regulate his temperature as he does with them. Surely he wouldn't die from this, but they seem to act as a way to control or manage the influx of energy when there's too much of it. If Godzilla didn't have his dorsal plates to regulate the energy, the atomic breath would probably just stream out uncontrollably. But notice when he's charging up, it seems to go through chambers. These seem like stopgap control measures so that the atomic breath doesn't come out as just one big forceful spew that Godzilla himself can't control. It goes into one dorsal plate and collects the energy there, then builds up to the other, and it's kind of like a brake system, to be honest. I know this might be a poor analogy, but it's the best I have right now. Imagine riding a bike or driving a car down a very steep hill. Now, what is easier to control and less dangerous? Gunning your car down the steep hill at 120 miles per hour, which is very fun. But if you move a certain way, it can be catastrophic for you. Or as you are descending down the hill, to hit your brakes every now and then. Maybe every few feet, you tap the brakes, then you release again, let gravity pull you down, then you tap the brakes again, and you release again, let it pull you down, then you tap the brakes again. And then when you get near to the bottom, then you can gun. So that way you descend the hill safely without losing control of the car. It seems as though this is the way that the atomic breath and the dorsal plates on Godzilla's back operate to control his ability. If he didn't have them at all, they were like completely removed, he would not have that control. Remember Shin Godzilla? He was able to expel his atomic breath or beams straight through his back. He was super powerful and doubly enraged, which would make sense why he had to expel all of that heat and energy. And we saw something similar in Legendary's Godzilla. If he didn't have them, that would be catastrophic for everyone in the area, because not only would it blast through his mouth, it would probably blast through his back. The dorsal plates help keep him contained, help keep that power contained within the system. Losing his plates could trigger the last resort, and it would end up looking just like how Shin Godzilla looked when he used his ability of blasting atomic beams through his back. In Godzilla Aftershock, that is partly the reason why Godzilla was able to defeat the Muto after his dorsal plates had been blasted. That's also why they look the way they do now. For those of you who have not read Godzilla Aftershock, this is what happens. Godzilla loses his dorsal plates, and because he has nothing to channel the energy from, because the dorsal plates do contain some of that atomic energy or help funnel it, guess where the atomic energy comes from? Straight through his back, where the dorsal plates used to be when he loses them, just like with Shin Godzilla. So, in conclusion, the dorsal plates help to funnel the atomic breath so Godzilla can spray it out in a controlled manner through his head. But if he didn't have the dorsal plates, he wouldn't die. He just wouldn't have that much control with that ability, and he eventually would grow them back, because Godzilla does have that regenerative ability. As he did grow them back, because in 2019, we see him with a fresh set of new and improved dorsal plates. So nothing would really happen to him per se, except that he wouldn't have a method to communicate in that manner. He would have to use other ways. As for defense, Godzilla doesn't really seem to use these as defense. He uses them more as an ornament and as a way to regulate his temperature and his ability. So I hope that answered the question. That was very fun, and we'll be doing the other video. It's kind of synonymous with this one, but just in case other people haven't seen this video or you're looking for that specific question answered, there will be another video touching on why Godzilla needs his plates or what they're specifically used for. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Altiori. You ask, we answer.